And welcome back to Consumer Choice Radio, broadcasting here on Saga 960 AM in the Peel Region, Ontario, Canada, and on the Big Talker 106.7 FM, Wilmington, North Carolina. We're speaking with Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, a multi-time guest here on Consumer Choice Radio. Franco, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Hey, it's my pleasure, man. I love being on this show.
Well, hopefully it's a nice, fun atmosphere, broadcasting across North America. And wouldn't you know it, we got some great news. Apparently the platform of the Liberal Party of Canada was just unveiled. I'll show this at least here on our video viewers on YouTube. I do have my ballot here, Bulletin de vote spécial officiel from the Government of Canada. I'm looking at my district, my riding, seeing the candidates, and I guess now I have the Liberal Party that I can look at. And you've been taking a crack a little bit at this, and you say that there's a lot of spending involved, Franco. Could that be true?
Yeah, I mean, ton of spending. All we're hearing from the Liberal Party, especially in this platform, is just more borrowing, but we're not hearing a peep from the Liberal Party on when they're going to balance the budget. I mean, actually, I think taxpayers should be worried that the Liberal Party may never balance the budget. We'll remember back to 2015. Remember when then Justin Trudeau, he was first running for Prime Minister, he told all of us that he would balance the budget in 2019. Well, he missed that target. Instead, he decided to run huge deficits. And now here we are. And with the Liberal Party's platform, they don't have a balanced budget in sight. Essentially, what they're trying to do is they're relying on the economy to hopefully contain the debt to GDP ratio without really finding some savings in this huge bloated budget. But I think the question on all of our minds is, well, what happens if reality isn't as rosy, right? What happens if Canada stumbles into another downturn? What happens if interest rates spike? And that's why this plan is so reckless.
You're listening to Consumer Choice Radio. We're speaking with Franco Terrazzano. He's the Federal Director at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My inbox has been flurried with many of his statements, and he even had some words to say about the Conservative platform. So I will say you guys are equal opportunity punchers here. And you also say that they don't necessarily have, a large plan for the debt. And we've talked let's just go back to normal figures. What is the Canadian federal debt looking like right now? And do any parties right now in this election have a shot, or at least a small plan to get this under control?
Well, the federal government's debt is already over $1 trillion, which means that each Canadian owes about $29,000 in federal government debt each. Now, I just want to throw a mind-boggling stat at you and your listeners here, but the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which essentially is the government's independent budget watchdog, it said that under the current trajectory, we would not see a balanced budget in Canada again until 2070. Right? That would add trillions of dollars onto the debt. $3.8 trillion lost just in interest charges, right? That's not going to healthcare. That's not staying in our pockets. That's going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street just to service the debt. But to answer that second question, essentially, no, we're not seeing any party really put a plan together to chip away at the debt. Now, we are seeing the Conservatives as one of the only three major parties to actually talk about balancing the budget. So I guess kudos there. But essentially what we're hearing from the Conservatives is, hey, trust us, and in 10 years, we'll have done something good.
Yeah, and I go back to one of your other sort of press releases here, and I think it's an interesting idea. You talk about how actually it's a divide between government and taxpayers. And it's obviously a big deal because we're talking about, as you said, $1 trillion, and just the amount per family, the amount per individual. In a way, you start out, if you're just born, and, I've got a newborn on the way, I've got a young daughter, we're still in the process of doing the Canadian citizenship thing. That's an aside, by the way. Apparently, it is so difficult to get a certificate of citizenship for actual Canadian citizens abroad that basically they're only now doing the applications that were filed in February 2020, which means I have another year and a half before my application will even be opened up. Just insane. I guess they're not using all that money to fund the bureaucracy. But this kind of divide, between the government and the taxpayers, what kind of causes this to be so poor, so bad? Why is it that we don't really have concerns of debt that are brought up? Is it just because there are so many promises of money? Is that we kind of see this boutique idea of government that's trawled out every election? Is that just, the permanent campaign that we're going to have until the Canadian government runs out of money?
Well, one of the reasons is that I think the blame has to, in some part, probably a big part, fall on the politicians. I mean, they don't want to talk about this, right? They want to ignore the elephant in the room, which is the $1 trillion worth of federal debt, because they don't want to make tough decisions and face some backlash from certain special interest groups, right? And look, these politicians are the ones who can get cameras quite easily. They can do press conferences quite easily. They could be talking and raising awareness about the $1 trillion elephant in the room, but they don't want to. But here's the truth of the matter: is that eventually tough decisions are going to be forced on us, right? We've seen that here in Canada. Remember back in the 80s and early 90s when the politicians were kicking the deficit can down the road. Well, what ended up happening? Well, we ended up seeing the province of Saskatchewan have to shut down 50 hospitals across the Prairie province, right? Eventually, politicians are going to have to come to grips with reality, and they're going to have to start taking deficits seriously. And if they don't do it today, we're going to have some really tough decisions forced on us tomorrow.
I want to shift gears a little bit because there's been some interesting dialogue about sort of the future of private versus public healthcare in Canada. And it's something that, at least for Canadians who go abroad or people who hear about the Canadian system, it's a very important thing. There's this kind of public insurance system. And sort of what was brought up in the course of the campaign was this insinuation by current Prime Minister Trudeau that the Conservatives and Erin O'Toole would, sort of hint at a private healthcare system, and made it seem terrible and bad. I guess many European governments haven't woken up to this because they do have these hybrid type systems. What did you think of those comments? And do you think this is sort of a good attack that you can put up in this campaign, or is this just something that's a bit weak?
Well, I think it's more fiction than it is like true fact, right? I think what we do need in Canada is we do need some more entrepreneurs to actually help the healthcare system to take some burden off of the overrun government healthcare system. Because in Canada, what we have, especially for your listeners down south, I mean, we have a very high cost government healthcare system, but you can look at different reports, different institutions who say, like, even though we spend a ton of money within the government healthcare system in Canada, we don't get the best results. And I think it really just brings to light the fact that, hey, if you have a problem, just throwing more tax dollars at it doesn't fix that problem. You have to really think about how do you change the institutions and the incentives. I mean, case in point is Alberta. The Alberta government has one of the biggest spending per person on healthcare in Canada, and it has some of the well, let's just say it's not achieving the best results, right? Which just boils down to the question of, well, how are you going to improve the system? And one way to improve Canada's healthcare system is just to allow more entrepreneurs to relieve some of the burden on the government healthcare system. And in fact, we have done that here in Canada. I mean, Saskatchewan was very successful doing that, where they had some private clinics, which reduced wait times and reduced the costs.
Yeah, hopefully we can get that in other provinces as well. Not sure if that'll always be the case. But let's think about that a little bit more, too, because a lot of the interesting debates about healthcare that have popped up in the United States, let's say in the last 6 years or so, focused a lot on the federal government. In Canada's system, as we know, it is provincial, and you have the Canada Health Act, sort of as the backbone of that. Do you see good examples of sort of more entrepreneurial systems throughout the provinces, or other provinces that you hold up? You gave us Alberta, which is usually, sort of the use case for kind of better capitalistic government. But are there other provinces that are doing a bit better there when it comes to having private services or just more competition?
Well, Alberta's trying to move more towards the direction where you have publicly funded but private delivered healthcare. That is something that the Premier, Jason Kenney, it seems like he's trying to do, and we encourage him to do that. But it's very difficult, right? Because you have these government union bosses that essentially have a stranglehold on the healthcare system. Let me just give you an example. So we got the health minister from the Alberta government who came out and said, okay, we've got to privatize some of the services within a hospital, right? So talking about who's pouring the coffee, who's changing the laundry sheets, not even talking about the frontline services like nurses and things like that, just talking about some of the operations within the healthcare system, right? Pouring the coffee in the cafeterias, doing the laundry, just talking about that stuff, trying to get that privately delivered. And the union bosses within the government system just lit their collective hair on fire. So that is going to be the challenge that a lot of politicians have within Canada.
Interesting. We're speaking with the Twitter user Franconomics, that is Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Another point that I wanted, let's be globalist for a second. I know one thing that you've weighed on a good amount is this entire idea of this global minimum tax, something that Christiana Freeland has been very big on, Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister. And it's this idea essentially that every country in the world is going to have this standard, flat sort of corporate tax. There will be no competition. There will be no squeezing out other countries or having all of the companies go to Ireland or Estonia. What are your kind of thoughts on this? And, how would Canada look if this were to go through? How would Canada look compared to the United States? Because I know there's a lot of talk about different rates and different areas. Is there a chance that Canada would actually lose a good amount of companies to places either in Europe or the States or anywhere else?
Well, sorry, I cut out for a second, so I didn't catch the whole question, but we are very concerned about this global tax cartel, right? And essentially, I don't know if you covered this in your talk, but essentially what this all stems from the Biden administration wanting to raise taxes and not wanting to lose businesses elsewhere, right? The thing that we do know is that tax competition is a good thing for taxpayers. It's a bad thing for politicians, these big spending politicians who are tripping over themselves, trying to figure out how to pay back their debts. It's bad for politicians. It's good for taxpayers, essentially because if you have these different jurisdictions who have to compete with each other in terms of offering services more efficiently at a lower cost, that's a good thing for all the taxpayers involved. I mean, case in point, look at the small prairie town of Lloydminster in Alberta. It's on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan, so it's actually a border town. And for a long time, the Alberta part of the city was thriving. And the reason is because, the Alberta government had a more business-friendly tax regime, and it actually forced the Saskatchewan government to make some changes. So that is a prime example of how tax competition actually helps Canadians. When we saw the federal government back in the day reduce business taxes, one of the things that they cited was international competitiveness. Same with the Alberta government, citing international competitiveness to push them to lower taxes. So I think as taxpayers, as actual citizens, we should be pushing for more tax competition. This global tax cartel, honestly, is a rate.
Yeah, I think it was a total loss for a lot of people who saw Burger King kind of uplift from the U.S. As their corporate base and head up to Canada up north. And I think, Franco, you covered it well because it is all about competition. It's about competition in tax rates. It's about competition in what countries can offer various companies and entrepreneurs. So I think you're definitely on point there.
And can I just jump in for a second? Because I think it's just so naive to think that you limit tax competition and businesses are all of a sudden just going to stop shopping around, right? That's not going to happen, especially when you talk about these large multinational corporations who hire oodles of government relations, public relations people. What are they there to do? They're there to get their business the best deal possible. So if we're not trying to attract these businesses through tax competition, well, what are we going to try to attract these businesses over? It's going to be corporate welfare. Right. And the last thing that we need is to give our politicians, especially here in Canada, another reason to throw buckets of cash at these businesses. You know what I say? I say, hey, let's actually focus for more tax competition. Let's keep taxes low for everyone. Let families, businesses, workers keep more of their own money, and let's compete that way. And hey, if the U.S. wants to raise their taxes, put in bad policy, I say respectfully, fill your boots.
Wonderful. Yeah. Franco, I guess we did have 1 minute. I do want to hear very quickly about the CTF and your own campaign. Apparently, you're going around the country showing people these huge clocks, I think on billboards. I know you guys have done things like this in the past, kind of showing the debt. Where will this be debuting, and what does this look like?
So so part of it has already debuted. We did have a debt campaign in major cities across Canada, a billboard, and it just showed, hey, we're $1 trillion in debt. We had a little baby on the billboard, and it says, hey, guess how much debt she's in? And it's $29,000 federally. So we did have that. Our next step is we are going to be doing a debt clock tour. We have this huge truck going around showing how the federal government's debt is increasing in real time. And it's going to be coming out soon. I can't give you a firm date on that, though.
No worries. Coming out. Franco, thanks so much for coming on Consumer Choice Radio.
My pleasure, man.